Welcome everyone. This seminar is part of a series we run out of the social work discipline at the University of Wollongong to engage with our colleagues in the field and provide some professional development, but also to have a bit of back and forth around what happens in the teaching, research and practice space and how that all connects together. I'm going to stop speaking because my voice is not great and I'm going to start coughing any second now. So I will turn off mic and camera, but hand over to Deanne to proper formal acknowledgement of country, but also then to take us away with this seminar. And thank you so much to Deanne for all your organisation and to the panel as well.
Thanks, Mim. I don't know, people joining us would be aware of the successful Sunset Seminar series that the social work department at UOW has hosted for a long time. I'd like to thank the working group, Mim Alanka and Janet, who we've worked together to relocate and rebadge the series to this time slot in the hope that more people would be able to join in on really important conversations about the realities of doing social work. Thank you for that. And I'm just going to share my screen, I'm hoping. Okay, can you all see that? Okay, so today's Midday Muse, as we're calling this new series, is on critical reflection in social work supervision, and we are having a panel discussion. But before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge the unceded Aboriginal land. The Wollongong campus here is on Darawal country, but the University of Wollongong spreads across many interrelated Aboriginal countries, bound by sacred landscape and intimate relationships since creation, which goes from Sydney to the Southern Highlands to the South Coast, from the waters, the sea waters, to the mountains and to urban and rural landscapes. So we acknowledge the custodianship of generations of elders of this place and extend respect to all Aboriginal people here. We also need to acknowledge the devastating impact of ongoing colonisation has had of generations of Aboriginal communities, and then commit ourselves to truth-telling, healing and decolonising education. And it's a long project and we've got a long way to go, but we're all here to take steps in that direction.
My apologies, Deanne. My apologies, Deanne, before you keep going. We can see your slides with your notes. We can't see just the whole slide. So you just want to change the view.
Okay.
And for those who can't hear, I think that may be an issue with your setting, not with the presenter settings.
Is that better? Is that changed now?
Yes, that's it. Well done, Deanne. Thank you.
Thank you. I've already shared my terror of the technology, so apologies. I'm back on track now. So I'd like to introduce our panel today. I've got some bios that have been sent through, so I'll briefly refer to those in terms of introduction. But with our first question, people will introduce themselves further in the context that they're in. So we have, at the top of our list, we have Caitlin Belt, who's a third-year bachelor's student at UOW, and she's just finished her first placement at Continuum Consulting, where she learnt a lot about critically reflective supervision, which I hope she'll share those experiences with us today. Next on the list, we have Katie Fox. Katie is a team leader at Waminda, and she is in a unique position on the panel in a sense that she supervises a team of 6 and supports them in their important roles in community, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal workers. And she's also a current UOW student. She's been a student of mine, so she's a supervisee as well. So I'm sure Katie will tell us a lot about being in that unique binary position. We also have, next we have Kate Oakley, who graduated from Western Sydney University in 2016, having spent 5 years in child protection sector before transitioning to disability sector, where she's worked for 4 years, the last 4 years at Real Life Assistance, where she supports participants with ongoing psychosocial disabilities. She supports students. She's one of our field educators, working alongside participants in her organisation and other professionals to help them develop their professional identities and discover their own passions in social work, which is really important. We have Rebecca Ruridge, who is the social work educator for Illawarra Shoalhaven Local Health District. She brings a broad range of clinical experience into her role, having worked in community health with a focus on brain injury, as well as inpatient critical care, maternity, paediatrics management, and the non-government sector. She's got a strong interest in clinical supervision and enjoys creative approaches and to help staff and students engage in critical reflection. And then we have, last but not least, we have our own Tracy Willow, who's one of our field education supervisors, and she's worked in a range of settings as a social worker, both rural, remote, and regional, and helping people have access to justice, particularly in community legal centres. That's where Tracy and I met many years ago, working in the Blue Mountains community together. That's one of the things about social work, isn't it? I mean, it's just 6 degrees of separation, and you've got connections with so many people over your career. So Tracy's got extensive experience in supervising social work students, and she's always seeking to invite creative and collaborative learning practice in her supervision. So that's our panel for today. We'll hear from them all in a second. But before we go any further, I'd just like to kind of offer some working definitions of some of the things we're talking about today. I'm just putting up here the good old Gibbs reflective cycle, which this was first published in 1988. So this cycle is older than probably many of the people in this room today. It's been around a long time as a way of thinking, not necessarily coming from social work education, coming from a general education space, but generally it's the underpinning of most reflective practice that we do, where you've got a description of something that's happened, what are the feelings and the thinking that's come out of that, evaluating what that experience was like, whether it's on the positive side of the ledger or the negative, an analysis, what other meaning making can be made, any other conclusions of what else could have been done differently, and then that leading to an action plan, which informs further practice. So because we're social workers, we've got a unique spin on how we do things. And so critical reflection is certainly an extension of the reflective practice cycle. But it's about primarily about deconstructing assumptions that are held individually, socially, and politically, and the opportunity to reconstruct knowledge for further action from an anti-oppressive perspective. So that comes from the Jan Fook and Fiona Gardner text, been around a long time, but still foundational in helping us practice critical reflection. It also allows for the wider understanding of the social and cultural context of practice, actively promotes social justice. That's why it's a social work ethic, and also human rights. And that quote from Matt Rankin, I just need to say that Matt is from the University of Auckland. He runs the postgrad degrees in supervision, and he's my supervisor. So he supervises my supervision, which I think is, people think if you're in a senior position and you're managing people or you're supervising others, that maybe you don't need supervision. But I would argue absolutely the opposite, that you actually need more supervision as a supervisor. And this comes from Carol from 2010, that it's an emotional experience, a cognitive one, very often in that order, with unrest, confusion, unease, dissatisfaction, shock, or even wonderment. And it's a process that is talking about values and principles. So yeah, it's a complex process, but a necessary one. To add a decolonising layer to that, we're adding Aboriginal ways of knowing and being and doing into how we do critical reflection, implementing Dadiri, that deep listening that comes from Aboriginal ways, truth telling, and also around affirming cultural identities and healing through creating a third space in supervision where Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal ways of knowing, being, and doing can come together, and we can look for the common ground. So here's just some sort of definitions to get us started. And I'll stop sharing my slides. So I'd like to go to the panel. I might start with the field educators first, and maybe Rebecca, I'll pick on you first to address the question of how you do critical reflection in the health context, with the dominant way of working being clinical supervision. But yeah, if you could address that in terms of health and how you do critical reflection, and also if you've got any stories you want to share in that.
Sure. My mic's on now, isn't it?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I guess when I was thinking about this question, I was just thinking about, well, what are those really kind of unique features of working within a biomedical discourse that kind of really emphasizes kind of diagnosis and treatment and clinical efficiency. And for our students, that can be really confronting because it can sit quite oppositional to some of the values that social work holds. So thinking about, well, what are some of those core things that we might be working with our students about in terms of unpacking and critically reflecting what that biomedical discourse looks like. So things, for example, like shaping language. So within a health context, patients are often referred to really looking at them as conditions rather than people. So an example of that might be, they talk about the stroke in bed 4 rather than, the person and who they are. But I think also, health is a unique environment in the sense that we love a good acronym, and there seems to be an acronym for everything. So for our students coming into that environment can be really challenging. And for many of them, it's like learning an entirely new language. So thinking about, I guess, those two contexts of language. I think the sights and the smells and diagnoses can be very confronting. So supervision is an important space to be unpacking that. So, for many of our students coming into health placements, they're exposed to death and dying and chronic disease. And that kind of intersectionality between things like mental health, drug and alcohol, child protection, domestic violence, which can be, again, really confronting for students, and particularly if it's a context that they haven't been in before, or where they may not have been exposed directly to those sorts of issues. We often look at the biomedical discourse in the context of the way that it reinforces power imbalances, particularly between us as professionals and patients, and kind of really unpacking how we might mitigate some of that where we can. I think that biomedical discourse often really devalues holistic psychosocial perspectives, which are very central, of course, to us as social workers, and they prioritise, at times, clinical outcomes and efficiency over those kind of processes and relationships. So an example of that might be where there's a patient that they're wanting to discharge home because it's creating a bed block. But as social workers, as part of our assessment, we might determine that there's significant domestic violence, and for that person to return home, even though they might be medically stable, could place them at significant psychosocial risk. We know that hospitals are not always trauma informed. I think it's improving certainly, but there's lots of concerns at times for that students are exposed to. And we also recognise that health systems in general can be culturally blind, particularly to the systemic abuse that health services have historically engaged in with our Aboriginal patients. So thinking about those sorts of things, I guess when we're looking at supervision within the field, we're really trying to help our students to unpack things like kind of naming and examining those tensions between the medical and the social paradigms. We're helping them to reflect on assumptions and biases, so including their own assumptions and biases as well as the ones more broadly at a systemic level. And looking at particularly, I think, those cultural blind spots. We are helping our students to explore their values and their ethics and how that aligns with professional values and practice guidelines. We are often looking at things like systemic forces and the way that that impacts on practice. So things like policy and hospital culture and time pressures around discharge, etc. The consideration to professional identity and how that fits specifically within the multidisciplinary hierarchy of a biomedical system is really important, and a continued conversation within supervision. We often look at things like the ways that systems and language can depersonalize care, as I mentioned earlier. And I think particularly importantly, supporting our students and our staff to find the social work voice in advocating for patients and ensuring that we're maintaining that sort of patient-centred, strength-based, trauma-informed care. So I was just trying to think about an example of what that might actually look like in supervision, and I was reflecting on some conversations that I've had in various iterations, particularly working in the brain injury context, that I thought I might kind of share. So thinking as an example, we would often have clients that were referred or self-referred to the service who'd had a traumatic brain injury with kind of significant rehab goals and capacity for improvement, but they might just fall outside the age demographic for the service. So an example being, we would have an age cutoff of 65, and perhaps we'd been referred to for a client who might be 66 or 67. So conversations with students would often be around the fact that that referral criteria for age is really, predominantly an arbitrary line in the sand. It's really more about funding and bureaucracy than perhaps about the person's capacity to gain benefit from a cognitive rehab program. So some of the discussions that we might have in supervision would be centered around unpacking sort of the tensions between system constraints and human rights-based practice. So, for example, we might be discussing like what's the role of the social worker in advocating for services based on need and potential for benefit rather than age. We'd be looking at things like kind of the biomedical versus a holistic. So looking at the dominance of the medical model versus the biopsychosocial approaches that social work kind of engages in. So including sort of person-centered functional social recovery goals. We'd certainly be looking at values and ethics and the conflict between those things, and perhaps how our professional and personal values are challenged within this context, and how we would explore maybe concepts such as dignity and social justice. And I think supervision is a really important space for us as professionals, but also for our students to be looking at moral distress and the emotional impacts of the work. So for a student in this scenario, we might be exploring their feelings about the way that they've observed that decision, and recognizing the kind of the emotional labor of social work and the importance of naming and processing feelings of frustration, of powerlessness, of injustice, for example. And particularly, I guess, and finally, perhaps looking at our advocacy and our voice. So we might be discussing opportunities for advocacy for the client and providing sort of system level feedback and considering what scope the student might have in giving voice to those concerns and trying to alter the decision. So I think, I guess, in the example that I've provided, we can really see how supervision for the student is about helping them to strengthen their ethical reasoning, understanding the systemic issues that are present within a biomedical context, and also helping them to kind of build resilience.
Sorry about that. Thanks for that, Rebecca. I meant to say, anybody who has any questions for any of the panelists, please put them in the chat. I think maybe Janet, you're keeping an eye on the chat for us, just to see if there's any. We've got lots of questions here. So Tracy and Serena and I have kind of met to put the panel together, as well as all the questions. So we've got a stack of them, and it sounds like we probably will. Each panelist will have such a rich response to the first question, we might not even need them, but we'll see how we go. Thank you for setting the scene for us, Rebecca. We might get back to you with another question later on. Thank you.
Sure.
I might turn to Kate now to talk about the kind of, well, Kate Oakley. We'll get to you, Caitlin. Kate Oakley, in the NGO space, or in the disability sector, in the organisational context you're in, you know, how are you doing critical reflection and with your students in particular?
I guess with the students that we have on site, it is very much in group situations. So I have 2 other educators that help supervise the students. And it is very much on what is happening within our participants' lives at the moment. So it's very much advocacy based, very much reflection on their personal lives, being the participants' personal lives, and how that is impacting their NGIS plans, and how we can definitely see the frustrations grow within the NGIS space, and how we are up against so many different systems to try and get the best that we want for our participants, and acknowledging the difficulties that has within our role here at RLA. I guess from our point of view and what we do, it's very much, we're not going to hold the students' hands, we'll work alongside them, and if anything is coming up that they are wanting to unpack or wanting to learn more of, to bring to supervision, so we can look at it holistically and look at how it's impacting the student themselves, but also how it can impact the participants, and looking at how we can navigate those barriers for them to understand what is best for them. So it's very much not so much that clinical space that we're seeing, that like Rebecca was talking about. It's very much what's happening currently for our people that we're supporting at RLA.
Okay, thanks, Kate. I might go now to Katie in Waminda, and I wonder also, Katie, if you could also talk about the imperfect allies framework that Waminda has, that I think we've certainly discussed how that does assist with critical reflection and frank discussions on whiteness and white privilege and white supremacy, etc. I wonder if you could address that, Katie.
Sure, happy to. Hello, everybody. Yes, so just for people who don't know Waminda, it is an Aboriginal women-led organisation. And currently our staff sits at about 207 staff members, 70% of which are Aboriginal, and 30% are non-Indigenous. So just to speak, I suppose, to imperfect allies, of course, being a white person working in that space, we are acutely aware of that need to work from that non-Westernized approach. So I've spent the last 7 years unlearning everything that I have learned so far in terms of social work and the approach to the work. And really, I suppose there's a lot of sitting in discomfort, you know, because we go in with all of this experience and, you know, we know stuff. So I think there's a lot of challenging internally. And I think the Imperfect Allies Network is really good for that. So to kind of give you an idea of what that is, you know, the non-Indigenous people in the service meet in different groups to unpack some of that white privilege. What does that look like? White fragility, you know, looking at nice racism, because a lot of us are quite progressive white people and we like to do well. And often we're probably the greatest risk actually to the service because of that. So yeah, I think you know, this has been a big process, but I think one of the things for me, one of the learnings in terms of that critical reflection is, you know, when my racism is challenged, is to kind of accept that as a gift. and not to sit in the discomfort too long, and not to sit in the shame for too long, and not to be defensive. So that's kind of been a big learning curve, I think, for me. And there's a lot of ego that we got to leave outside the door. And certainly one of the things that we're looking at, and I was like, that just doesn't happen in the workplace. So as an imperfect ally, our work is not just when we're at Wominda. It's like, how do we manifest that every single day in our lives, and what does allyship look like? So just in terms of supervision around that, and Deanne, being my external supervisor, you know, the amount of times I've come to you, I'm like, oh yeah, I've done it royally this time, you know. We're not expected to be perfect, and we're not expected not to mess up. It's going to happen. We've all been colonized, you know. So I think there's that acknowledgement, but also, you know, saying sorry is great. It's not enough. We got how we're going to hold ourselves accountable to that. So that's really where that reflection comes in, and that action planning. What do I need to do next? You know, so literally I've been action planning on how not to be racist in all of my operational supervisions. And it's a very supportive environment in terms of that. There's not one of us there that doesn't make mistakes or will not continue to make mistakes. And so that's a really comforting thing. And so reflection is very, well, it can be cathartic, but it's also very much, oh, look, I can really do better. How can I do better? And it's not just about that imperfect allyship, but it's like looking at the Aboriginal ways of knowing, being, and doing, and really embracing them and working from that dominant narrative, I should say, and just challenging that. So we are expected at Wominda to push back on systems. That's an expectation. We don't get into trouble for that, you know, which I love, being an Irish rebel, you know, that really suits my personality. So yeah, and I guess it's also about looking at what our intentions. And I would say every social worker's intention is to do well, you know, and to work in the best interest of the person the individual with whom they're working. But you know that saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So with reflection, I guess for me, we're talking about reflection. It is, I reflect before I have an interaction. You know, if I'm going into a meeting with some Aboriginal colleagues, I will meet with them first. Tell me when you want me to jump in. Tell me when you want me to shut up. You know what, you know, so it's that kind of, how did I do this the last time? Where could I have done better? So it's kind of reflecting before we go into situations. Obviously reflecting within that situation, because you never know what way it's going to go. And then obviously that deep reflection and listening after an interaction. So yeah, it is about leaning into that discomfort. And sometimes I wanted to throw my hat in. Honestly, I just wanted to throw the towel in rather, and just kind of go, oh man, this could be so much easier. But what would that make me then as a social worker working in that space, or in any space actually? So I'm really valuing that opportunity to challenge my thinking, and challenge how I've worked before, and challenged all of the, you know, the approaches that I've learned, and embracing the ones that work within that as well. Does that answer your question? I feel like I've blabbed on for a bit, but
I think you've gone above and beyond, as you usually would, Katie, in such a beautiful way and an honouring way. Thank you. Caitlin, I might go to you because you're the box under me, and I saw you nodding your head a lot there. And I just get, for you, from a student perspective, I want to, you know, privilege that perspective about, you know, what critical reflection has been like for you on placement, and I guess what you value about it, and what you've learned about yourself.
Yeah, I was nodding my head a lot because sitting in the discomfort, I think that's a huge part of it. And also, I think as a student, you're so eager to please and be, you know, the perfect student for your supervisor and the whole workplace you're in. But I think it's really, you have to be honest and open and vulnerable with yourself and your supervisor in critically reflecting on like what did make you uncomfortable, how can you fix this, like, and really uncovering like your unconscious biases, like digging deep to kind of, yeah, even if they may be uncomfortable, you need to kind of understand them. So I think for me, a huge part was just being open and honest in communicating with my supervisor about how I was really feeling and working through those feelings before it, you know, develops into something worse, I want to say. I don't, yeah. So I don't know what else to say.
Thanks, Caitlin. That's beautiful. Have you? Can you think about what supported you to be in that place of vulnerability, or that were they people? Were there things that you had access to, resources?
Yeah, definitely. I think the role of my supervisor was a huge part in why I felt so comfortable. I think she created a very consistent and just really honest again and of like relationship with me, and just kind of building that trust. I think she did really well. It never felt judgmental. It always felt like I could go to her easily. Yeah, and just working through it with other peers as well kind of helped. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Great, thank you. I might go to Tracy now. Maybe Tracy could pick up around addressing the, how you do critical reflection, but maybe also pick up on the question of how you scaffold a safe place for students to be able to speak to moral distress, to be be vulnerable that way. What do you actually do?
I think that I'm in a privileged position that I get to wear the hat of both either the liaison tutor and or the external supervisor, and sometimes both. And that's really important because I get to walk with students and the agency supervisor and look at what does safety mean. But it isn't, I love the whole conversation we're having now about leaning into discomfort, because the truth is, we know that the systems aren't perfect. And, what's wonderful about our social work students is that they go through this whole pathway of learning, which is inviting them to critically question and challenge all the time. And so I loved, Caitlin, what you just said about, you're eager to please, and we love that about our students, but we also want them to take on board the fact that when students go into placements, we want them to start to question what they're seeing as practice. We want them to start having their own thoughts. They might even have inspiration, and they might even want to take some leadership. And what I think is beautiful in the supervision sessions that both I facilitate, but also the wonderful members of the field ed team at UOW do, is we hold those spaces so that students can imagine and reimagine. They can look at what's going on and describe what's great in practice, but they can also start talking about if they could change anything. I'm often saying to students, if you just imagine you've got a magic wand, what would it look like? How could it look like? Because we want them to, well, they are going to be the future social workers, and we want them to know that there's an opportunity to create change as part of everyday practice. I'm really lucky I get to work mostly with the community development placements. And within that, in terms of creating safety, some students don't want to do community development. They want to work one-on-one with individuals. So holding them around a space of recognizing that there are many places and spaces for social work, and adapting to that can be easy and can be hard. But I also work with students who importantly are finding their voice, and in supervision, knowing that you have a voice and you can use a voice, and what would it look like to even question using your voice is some of the stuff that we talk about in supervision. But having clear, the learning plan is really important. That's not just a task document. It's a document that helps students. It's very organic in nature, so it can keep adapting. But students can start off in a really safe way in terms of what they think they want to learn. But when we get to the midpoint, then they can go further if they want to. And we encourage that in terms of their own bravery and courage and their own willingness to want to keep adapting.
Thanks, Tracy. I remember in our discussions in putting questions together for the panel, you particularly were really keen to make sure that we talked about intersectional positionality. I'm just wondering if you would like to, and I think this is picking up on what Katie was talking about in terms of the imperfect allyship. Would you like to speak a bit to why that is important? That you know, both the respective cultural positionality of both supervisor and supervisee are part of the discussion?
Absolutely, because I think that the individual student brings many elements of self to that placement, as does that agency supervisor. And it's not just transactional. It's about really recognizing that each part of self plays a really important role in doing the work of placement, but also discovering self within placement and also identifying what that learning is and recognizing, even though an agency may well be working with particular communities, I just know that Practice Standard 2 working with First Nations peoples and communities can be such a stumbling block for students because they say, oh, my agency says we don't work with First Nations peoples. And then I say, are there opportunities? Are there possibilities to even have conversations with your agency in terms of even extending relationship with First Nations organisations, or in terms of maybe doing some research that invites? One of the things I always say to students when they've walked through the door after a few sessions is re-walk back through the door and think about the people who are walking in the door. What do they see from that agency? And that's a really amazing thing, because sometimes students are noticing things for the first time, or they're actually recognizing. One student said to me just the other day, I went to an event and First Nations people's artwork was being presented as a joyous celebration, but there was no acknowledgement of country. Now, that was a first placement student. He said, I'm astounded by this. And he said, but this is also new learning for me. And I just thought, I think a whole new world opens up for students, and they are carrying all this many knowledges. And I guess the beautiful invitation to placements is, as well as them doing tasks that are important to the agency, what are the other gifts that might emerge from either the conversations or the possible new projects that weren't discovered at the initial conversation?
Great, thanks for that, Tracy. Just moving on a little bit about some of the practicalities of supervision discussions. I guess my experience of a supervisor, as a supervisor, is that I have people come that are very well prepared for supervision. People working in clinical spaces sometimes send me through a genogram and case formulation questions, and they're very goal orientated. And then I've got my Aboriginal supervisees who just turn up for the yarn, and I follow the lead. And there's a whole spectrum of the ways that people do supervision and the time and resources to prepare. So I just wondered if each of the panelists could address the issue of preparation, like even if it's only things to prepare in your mind, even if you don't get a chance to write them down, what are reasonable expectations around supervision preparation, and does it make a difference anyway? So I could start with Rebecca again, if you don't mind. We'll go around in the same order.
Sure. Yeah, look, I think that both the supervisor and the supervisee has a responsibility in terms of preparing for supervision. I think we can often, talk about the fact that the supervisee needs to bring the material, but I think the reality is that sometimes, particularly if they're a student who hasn't had a lot of experience in this space, they might not know what to bring. So I think it's really helpful for us just to always have some things that we could potentially put out there. And it might just, I have a bit of a creative bent, but it might be just having in the back of our mind some questions that would help to deepen conversations, or it might be a kind of a practical tool like, you know, drawing on some of the St. Luke's innovative resource cards or something like that to stimulate conversation if the student comes unprepared, or you know, I think sometimes conversations can get a little bit stuck, or where you might want to look at it at a, you know, from a deeper level. I also think just thinking about the environmental context is important. So, you know, I think it's great to have face-to-face supervision, but I also think there's real merit at times in utilising the environment around us. So that might be engaging in a walking supervision, for example, and drawing on the environment as an opportunity to, you know, explore concepts or to use analogies, for example. Yeah, so I think there's lots of different components to this that we could keep talking about, but I guess that's, you know, in summary, I think it's both people's responsibility.
Thanks, Rebecca. Kate?
Hey, again at RLA, we make sure supervision is done face-to-face on a weekly basis, and that is shared between myself and my colleagues, both Liam and Justine. Initially, when we first start supervision, we have developed an agenda. We will initially run the meeting, and then as the students feel more confident, that then gets handed over to them to run that meeting, to work on those other skills that come with supervision. Other skills that come with social work, in making sure we can capture correct note taking and minute taking and things like that. But it is very much based on what has happened within placement, other areas that they want to work on towards, what is a theory that they've seen directly observed by myself, Liam, or Justine, or even a theory that they want to unpack further. So it is definitely very much a collaboration between both student and supervisor.
Thanks, Kate. Katie?
I guess I'm going to talk about more of staff supervision, and then my experience being a student as well. But I guess for us, we do have an operational supervision form that we fill out before we go into supervision and before people come to me for supervision. So I'm within that. It's really interesting because it's often not about work. So it's about people's values. What are their relationships? How do they feel the relationships are with their peers, with other, you know, managers, with me. And then we look at what, you know, a good experience that they might have had, or a challenge, and what does that say about their values? So we talk a little bit about that and bring back some of the work that they're doing to their values. And then we look at their professional goals, and we look at their well-being goals. So well-being is a really, really important part of our framework at WMINDA. It's quite strict in terms of taking well-being time. We get well-being time paid. So what are you going to do? So it's really getting people to think about that. And then what can I do so it's, you know, often when we hear about operational supervision, it's very much performance related. You know, what are you doing? How are you getting your KPIs? I don't look at that at all. We do talk about that towards the end, but it's very much about how can I support you to do your job better? What can we do? How can we work better together? And I guess for me, going into external supervision and into supervision, I kind of, again, look back at our last session. What I try to do is between sessions is write things down that, oh, I really want to talk to Deanna about this, or I really need to talk to Lisa about that, and whatever that is. Because sometimes by the time you get around to supervision, we do it every 6 weeks. You kind of forget. You're like, oh, you know, and you know yourself, if you don't address something, and you think, oh, it's okay now, it does fester. So it's always really good to try and write it down, try and remember what it was, and bring that to supervision as well. So while we have the forms and it's really formal, the actual supervision itself is not. So we could go to the park, like we could go for coffee, and I try and take it out of the office, but I leave it in the hands of the person with whom I'm working. I go, where do you want to do this today? And we could go and sit by the ocean. We sit in a yarning circle. So whatever works for them. And we try again every 6 weeks to give 2 full hours over to that. And just let it be a natural thing that they drive and guide. Yeah. And so I guess, as I said already, for me going into supervision, it's what are the things that I really messed up, or I feel I messed up, or where could I have done better? And having discussions around that again, not just being an imperfect ally in that space, but also just being a human in that space. What does that look like when I make errors of judgment, you know, and how can I do better? Yeah.
Thanks, Katie. And Caitlin, well, how do you get ready for your supervision sessions? What are some things?
I think what Katie said, I kind of also would write down whatever I needed to ask Danielle. I'd like have it written down, be like, make sure you ask her this, make sure you ask her this. But we were lucky enough to have very consistent supervision meetings. And even when we first went in, and it was my first day, I had never really worked in social work at all in any kind of related field. So I was very nervous. But we went and had a very clear discussion for like half an hour, just talking through every bit of supervision, what it's going to look like, and just kind of building that relationship and a schedule, which I found so useful because I always knew what was happening. I knew I could always talk to her and have those conversations consistently. Trying to think what else I did for preparation. I think if I found anything really confronting, especially in children court things, I would immediately jot that down in my head, especially when we were in the kind of interviews or anything like that. I would make sure I make a note to talk about that later. If I ever felt uncomfortable, you know, I talk about that later. Yeah, just taking into note, I don't know, everything you're feeling in the moment, and yeah, I don't know, communicating it.
I guess we'd call that reflection in action, hey?
Yeah.
Like it's actually catching those thoughts and feelings that are coming up right in that while you're doing,
Yeah.
which is an advanced supervision skill, isn't it? The reflection skill to be able to do that. Thanks, Caitlin. Tracy, anything you would like to add about preparation?
I guess the difference for me is being an external supervisor who's not in the agency. I guess I always want to start where the students at. Some are really structured and some just want to come and have a conversation, and that's great. I think what's really important to always keep as part of whatever the students bring in, I ask them as a first up question, like, what are you bringing to supervision today? Because I want them to see themselves as active citizens and co-learners and co-collaborators in the process. It's not just a top-down process. I also want to talk about with them. I love stories, so I'm always telling them I love sharing them stories. So we often go off on different tangents. I also want to know about them as a human being. So sometimes they share different parts of self, and we come back to those when maybe there isn't something that, or there's a bit of a struggle talking about placement in the moment. I also, ethics is really important. It's been highlighted today, but really, you know, looking at what are those ethical dilemmas is great to talk about. And I also talk a lot about self-care as practice, not just as an add-on task. And sometimes it might mean, and I say, we've got 2 minutes to go. If I was to give you the gift of time of 10 minutes, what would you do for the next 10 minutes and not go away from your computer? What would you do? And they tell me what they do, and I go, okay, here's the gift of time. So sometimes it's about that practice in action, so that we're cementing that as really important to all the other things we're doing in supervision.
Thanks for that, Tracy. Just wondering, given we've only got 10 minutes left, oh my goodness, where's that time flown? I'm just wondering if there's been any questions that have come up in the chat, or if anybody would like to ask anyone on the panel anything just from the floor, from people who are here.
Deanne, this is Alankar. We don't just reporting that we don't have any questions in the chat box as of now, but if people want to post them there, I'll be happy to relay them to you.
Or put your hand up. Use the reactions function and put your hand up if anyone would like to add to anything that's been said, ask more about anything that we've talked about so far.
Dan, just while that's happening, perhaps if I can just make a brief comment. I think for social workers, we have been really blessed to have supervision as a part of the culture of what we do within our profession, and that is quite a unique space comparative to many of our other colleagues. So I think it's also really important that we impress upon our students the value of this time and the value of using this time wisely. You know, it's not just an opportunity to chat, but it's actually sometimes there's, you know, a space for just a general debrief, but we want to use that time as an opportunity for transformational change or transformative change, and you know, and to really explore deeply what's happening within our practice. So I think part of our responsibility is also reinforcing and setting the culture around supervision.
And also reminded me, Beck, that supervision is fundamentally a relationship. And I guess, you know, we've talked about, you know, being vulnerable in these conversations, and maybe, you know, daring to speak things we've only had in our thought bubbles for the first time, perhaps. And actually what a precious space that is, and the kind of the trust and safety that's required to be able to go there to test assumptions, to discuss ethics, and particularly where you think there might be some dissonance with your supervisor. Could be, oh, I don't think we're on the same page here. How are we going to navigate that? You know, like the relationship is the foundation. Ben, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, panel, first of all, but also to say thank you, Deanne, for mentioning the supervision of supervision. And it'd be really fascinating, I think, to have a session in the future, particularly around that. I'm really curious to know what other people are doing. Certainly something I think that, you know, we in my organization, we need to do better and probably have more of a kind of formal framework for. We started to kind of do that, but, you know, getting that practice in place, I think is a good logical step. And so it'd be really great to hear if you've got any more thoughts on Deanne and on supervision of supervision.
Well, I could run a whole series of these seminars on supervision, because I have anyone who knows me knows I've been juggling this idea of pursuing the dreaded PhD in researching supervision. So I also have questions about, you know, what support, supervision support do supervisors need, and what sort of reflective spaces might be unique to performing that role. I'm also really interested in collective approaches to supervision, which we haven't really talked about today, but we've talked more about one-on-one. But I think we could also have another session on collective ways of doing supervision, and also drawing on some Indigenous knowledge to create those third spaces, to be able to have those frank and fearless conversations, and what the scope is for collective action that come out of those conversations when we're all doing it tough as individuals. So I'm also thinking that it'd be great to do another session just on that. But there's so many things we could be talking about in terms of supervision. Kate, you came off mute. You want us, Katie? Yeah.
Just to come in on another thing that I really value about supervision, and it's our just our kind of very vibrant conversations about new theories or new approaches, different ways of approaching a situation, learning about, you know, different social work theories that are emerging. I find that really exciting, and a really yeah, just having those discussions, and kind of, you know, when I'm frustrated with things, I kind of go, oh my God, this happened, you know, like, oh, did you know that this, you know, and you're always sending me links and keeping me informed of kind of new developments. I really, really value that about supervision as well. And then the other thing, somebody asked about a good model for group supervision, and just say Wominda has started the Circle of Connection, where they are starting to do group supervision with whoever wants to show up. And it really is a yarning circle, and very much run in that kind of Indigenous way, that wisdom. So if anybody wants to know about that, please get in touch with me, and I'll put you in touch with our manager of social and emotional wellbeing to talk to you about that. Yeah.
Great. We're down to the last 5. Any final thoughts or reflections before we kind of wrap up and maybe we'd love to invite you as the working group to generate some ideas for other midday muses that we could be doing on a variety of topics. Any final thoughts about supercritical reflection?
Maybe just a final thought from me is that I think as field educators, we can often feel like we need to have the answers. There can be a real sense at times that we need to have expertise across all things. And of course, we don't. And there's so much that we don't know. And I think part of creating that safety within a supervision space is also recognising as supervisors the limitations of our knowledge of our capacities and being prepared to share that vulnerability and share the not knowing and sit in the discomfort of perhaps your student being the greater expert in a particular area and celebrating that.
Humility. We talk about humility, but that's what that reminds me of. You know, we talk about cultural humility. I mean, I think, you know, supervision is a safe space, but a humble space too. I agree. Yeah.
And Deanne, if I can be a little bit shameless, I'm part of the field ed team, and I just know that, you know, our students, and we've got two here today who've just spoken so beautifully and shared such amazing practice wisdom, but, you know, students gain so much from the learning from placement, but they get to work out what does that knowledge look like in placement. So if you're sitting here today and you've thought, you know, we haven't taken a student for a while, or we could take more students, certainly the field ed team, sorry, I am being shameless, would love to hear from you, because we, you know, even if you haven't supervised before or for a while, it's an ongoing journey of learning, and each student is different. And not only do students learn, but we learn, and we keep on our toes. We're kept on our toes. So I think, and that's a good thing for us in practice, keeps us really responsive. So just putting a bit of a call out that we always love hearing from agencies who may not have taken students for a while and may think that this would be a really valuable time for them.
A totally shameless opportunity there, Tracy, but absolutely necessary. We need placements. That's thanks so much for everybody, particularly our panel members, for sharing your thoughts so fearlessly, candidly, and just articulated beautifully. There's been so much deep learning here today from everybody, and hope you've all taken away something from it into your social work practice, and I guess a sense of solidarity and I hope that's what these sessions do. Mim, did you have any last in this last couple of minutes, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, thank you, Deanne. And I want to say a huge thank you to the entire panel and for everyone being here. This is a record number turnout for this seminar. And I think it's because this topic is so incredibly relevant to everyone, right? And really needed at this point in time. So I want to thank you, Deanne, for spearheading. Thank you, everyone, for all you've done on the panel, for all our team that are here today being part of, and all of our greater community. It's fabulous to see you all and have you with us. Tracy, had you not done that shameless plug, I would have. Please take students. And keep an eye on your emails. We've got more seminars coming out across the year, so we'll be letting you know what's coming. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care. This has been recorded, and we will make it available for everyone. Okay.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you, everyone. Get well, Mim.
Bye.
Thanks.